You think you can spot the ones who are dangerous, the ones who lie, manipulate, or act with clear intent. But can you? Because the truth is, the most destructive people are rarely obvious. They don't raise their voice. They don't threaten you directly. They smile. They sit across from you at dinner. The real danger doesn't come from loud enemies. It comes from unconscious ones. Carl Jung spent his life mapping this unseen terrain, the realm of shadow, projection, and psychological entanglement, and what he uncovered is simple. The less someone knows themselves, the more they will unknowingly try to control you. This video is not just about them. It's about what happens when you stop noticing it, when you confuse chaos for care, when you mistake emotional hunger for love. Let's expose the types, one by one, before you become one of them. Have you ever spoken to someone and suddenly felt like the room shifted? Like their reaction didn't match your words? Like you were in trouble for something you never did? 1 second they're warm, the next cold, withdrawn, or erupting over something small. A smile turns sharp. A memory you didn't know you triggered becomes a weapon, and you're left wondering, what just happened? This is what it feels like to be near someone ruled by inner ghosts, a person who doesn't just feel emotions, but becomes possessed by them. Carl Jung didn't call them emotional. He called them complexed. To Jung, a complex isn't just a strong feeling. It's a hidden pocket of unresolved pain that breaks into the present like it owns the room. It's a forgotten wound, but with a voice, a need, and a habit of hijacking behavior. It acts like a second personality, one that surfaces when something, anything, even you, accidentally hits a buried nerve. That's what makes this kind of person so unpredictable. They don't just react to you, they react to something that happened years ago, but they don't realize it. They think it's about now, they think it's about you. You make a joke, they feel mocked. You express emotion, they see rejection. You ask for space, they hear abandonment. They're not being manipulative. They're being run by a part of themselves they've never met. And the pattern doesn't stay consistent. That's what makes it dangerous. It comes in waves. There are good days, moments of closeness. But then, without warning, the storm returns. So you begin to adapt. You soften your voice. You avoid certain words. And which ones invite an explosion? You don't call it survival. But that's what it is. You're living in a world where their triggers set the rules. And the scariest part? You start to lose track of who you were before it began, because you're constantly guessing, was I too cold? Did I sound too critical? Am I the one overreacting? You start to doubt your memory, your tone, your truth. And that's when the damage goes deeper, because now you're not just managing their emotions, you're beginning to erase your own. This isn't just emotional turbulence, it's identity erosion. Jung warned us, when a person doesn't acknowledge their complexes, those complexes take the wheel. They speak for them, feel for them, act through them. And if you're in their orbit, you'll feel it, not just emotionally, psychologically, energetically. They may be carrying the complex of the abandoned, the betrayed, the victim, the unworthy. And no matter how gently you treat them, you'll always feel like you're stepping on glass. Because the trigger isn't you. It's the unhealed memory behind their eyes. And when that memory gets stirred, everything rational disappears. Your presence becomes a threat. Your silence becomes an insult. Your love becomes pressure. You begin living in alert mode, scanning for signs, always adjusting, always trying to prevent the next eruption. But what if I told you it's not your job to stop the storm? Because it was never yours. It belongs to them, to the emotions they buried, that now demand to be felt through you. The most haunting thing about the complexed person is that they don't look dangerous, and they don't mean to be. But their pain wears a mask, and if you're not careful, you'll start wearing one too. Some people don't explode. They hold it in. They stay composed, polite, and proper. no matter the situation. They never show rage, never complain, they're always fine. And yet, being around them feels like walking next to a sealed vault, one that's pressurized, humming with something unspoken. They don't lash out, but something inside them is pushing against the surface. This isn't calm. It's containment. And when someone spends years repressing their darkness, that darkness doesn't go away. It waits. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the side of us that holds what we deny, suppress, reject. It's not evil. It's human. But when you pretend it's not there, it grows claws. People who carry the repressed shadow often seem admirable on the outside. Disciplined, controlled, kind, but look closer, and you'll notice patterns. They can't tolerate vulnerability. They avoid intense emotion in others. They become uncomfortable with honesty that breaks the social script. Because the part of you that's raw reminds them of the part of themselves they've locked away. And over time, repression takes a toll. It tightens the psyche. It twists moral standards into weapons. It projects judgment onto others for feeling what they've outlawed in themselves. They don't cry, but they resent those who do. They don't chase what they want, but they quietly punish those who do. Their world becomes rigid, sanitized, but beneath the order is a soul gasping for breath. Jung warned, the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. And this is exactly what happens. The more someone tries to be perfect, the more violently their suppressed impulses seek release. Sometimes that release is quiet, passive-aggressive remarks, icy silence, chronic dissatisfaction. Other times, it erupts, out of nowhere, over something small, and everyone around them is left wondering, where did that come from? The truth is, it came from years of compression, of pretending to be above it all, of denying they were ever angry, ever jealous, ever bitter. And if you're close to someone like this, you begin to feel it without ever being told. You start to tone yourself down. You suppress your reactions. You try to stay within the boundaries of what's acceptable, until eventually, you're no longer sure which parts of you are real and which parts are just coping. Because you don't want to provoke the pressure they're hiding. You don't want to be the one who makes them explode. But here's what Jung makes clear. That pressure was never yours. It was built long before you got there, and the longer they avoid it, the more you'll be asked to absorb it. Their rejection of their own shadow becomes the rejection of yours. Their war with themselves pulls you in as collateral. And the tragedy is, they don't see it. They think they're the balanced one, the reasonable one, the emotionally evolved one. But underneath the neatness is a storm they've never named. There's a type of person who never raises their voice, because they don't need to. They don't insult, they don't threaten, but they carry something far heavier. Judgment, not direct, not loud, but quietly present in everything they say, every glance, every passive phrase laced with righteousness. You feel it when you speak freely, a subtle discomfort, like you've stepped over a line they never explained, but fully expect you to know. They live according to rules, not just for themselves, but for you too. They hold themselves as the moral compass, the ethical standard, the guardian of what's right. But beneath the surface of all this virtue is something else, something far more manipulative. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He warned that morality, when used to escape the shadow, becomes a tool of repression, not growth. These people don't integrate their darkness. They project it. They take what they cannot accept in themselves. Desire, envy, selfishness, anger, and find it in you. Not to understand it, but to condemn it. And if you push back, they don't attack. They make you feel ashamed. You begin to feel guilty for wanting space, for expressing pain, for being human. Their control isn't loud. It's moral. It's phrased as concern. It's for your own good. You'll thank me later. Someone has to say the truth. But this truth is one-sided, filtered through their need to stay pure. By making others feel impure, they don't admit their resentment. They become outraged at yours. They don't acknowledge their desires. They label yours as selfish. They don't touch their shadow. They wrap it in a sermon and hand it to you as a warning. Jung saw this pattern as one of the most dangerous to the process of individuation because it kills self-exploration. It replaces truth with obedience. And it often appears in families, religious groups, rigid institutions, anywhere morality is treated as law rather than as a mirror. The moral controller doesn't want understanding. They want control. And when they can't control the world, they focus on your world, your decisions, your emotional life, your choices. And here's the trap. You start to internalize their voice. You begin to censor your impulses. You hesitate to say what you feel. You try to live up to their definition of good and bury anything that doesn't fit. Not because you believe it's wrong, but because you fear being seen through their eyes. Their morality becomes your invisible leash. And over time, you lose your instinct, you lose your clarity, you lose yourself. The tragedy is, they don't see themselves as controlling. They see themselves as protecting. They believe they're holding the line against chaos, sin, or collapse. But what they're actually doing is projecting their unclaimed shadow onto anyone who dares to live freely. The more rigid their image of goodness, the more violent their reaction to anything human. They will never call it what it is. But their morality isn't clean. It's infected with fear, with shame, with self-denial. And if you're around them long enough, you'll forget how to trust your own compass. Some people are so put together, so composed, charming, respected, that it's easy to think they've mastered life. They know what to say, how to act, how to fit any room they walk into, but stay around them long enough, and something starts to feel hollow. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because everything feels a little too right, too clean, too rehearsed, too distant from anything real. This is the world of the persona bearer, the person who doesn't just wear a mask, they become it. Carl Jung described the persona as the social face, the role we play to function in society. It's not inherently false. We all need it. We can't show every thought, every emotion, every flaw. But the problem begins when the mask isn't used. It's lived in. When someone becomes their profession, their role, their reputation, and forgets there's a person underneath it. These people are experts in saying the right thing. They avoid conflict, not from peace, but from fear. They keep everything controlled and call it maturity. They don't raise their voice, but they never speak from the heart either. They listen, but never fully let you in because they've spent so long being what the world wants. They're no longer sure what they want themselves, and the more the image is maintained, the more the self begins to suffocate. Authenticity becomes a threat. Spontaneity feels dangerous. And if you're close to them, you'll feel it. A subtle pressure to perform, to be on, to filter your feelings through what's acceptable. You start to mirror their performance. You laugh at the right times. You smile through discomfort. You polish your words. And slowly, you begin losing touch with your own center. Because being real around someone who's always in costume feels awkward. What's worse, they expect you to collaborate. They won't say it outright, but if you express something raw, messy, human, they'll retreat, not out of judgment, but out of fear of what it might trigger in themselves. This isn't arrogance, it's self-protection, because to feel something deeply would mean facing what they've buried. And that's the irony. They appear strong, but inside, they're fragile. Because the person they really are was locked away years ago in favor of someone easier to admire. Jung warned that the persona is useful until it becomes a prison, and once it does, the person loses access not just to their truth, but to their ability to grow. The persona bearer doesn't explode like the complexed, doesn't judge like the moral controller, but they do something just as dangerous. They invite you into a world that looks safe, but is emotionally sterile. A world where no one gets hurt, because no one gets close. And if you live inside that world long enough, you start to shrink yourself to match it. You hide the parts that don't fit. You pretend peace is enough, even when your soul is starving for something real. They think this is growth, success. But behind the polished exterior is a self they abandon to survive. And unless they turn inward, unless they peel back the layers, that self will remain buried under applause, praise, and polite silence. Not every manipulator knows they're manipulating. Some don't plan, they don't calculate, they don't consciously seek control. And yet, you always end up the one adjusting, the one apologizing, the one walking on eggshells, just to keep the emotional balance from tipping. At first, they seem sensitive, attuned, deep. They open up easily. They show you their pain, their fears, their past, and you feel needed, maybe even trusted. But over time, something shifts. You begin to notice a quiet pattern where their sadness becomes your responsibility. Their anxiety becomes your fault. Their silence becomes punishment. You try to help. You try to be supportive, kind, available. But no matter what you offer, it never seems to be enough. That's the trap. This isn't overt manipulation. It's emotional dependence wearing the mask of connection. Carl Jung spoke often about projection, when people cast out the parts of themselves they can't face and place them onto those closest to them. This is the unconscious manipulator's entire way of relating. They don't just see you. They see a mirror, a container for their wounds, a caretaker for their internal chaos. When they're angry, it's because you provoked it. When they're insecure, it's because you made them feel small. When they spiral, it's because you didn't say or do the right thing. They're not lying. They believe it because they've never questioned the source of their reactions. They've never separated their past pain from present moments, so you start to carry the weight. You over-explain. You suppress your truth to protect their emotions. You take on their moods like their weather. Uncontrollable, but yours to endure. And the manipulation deepens not through rage, but through guilt, not through dominance, but through helplessness. They present as fragile, but what they're really doing is outsourcing their psyche, handing it to you, until your identity begins to blur. You become the emotional regulator, the therapist, the anchor, all while losing sight of your own ground. And here's what makes it even more confusing. They're not always draining. Sometimes they're loving. Those moments feel real, because they are. But they're not stable. They're temporary resets, before the cycle pulls you back in. Jung warned that those who don't integrate their wounds unconsciously seek hosts to carry them, not because they're cruel, but because their shadow is too overwhelming to face alone. So they find people who are empathetic, compassionate, emotionally available, and they make them the emotional scaffolding they were never taught to build themselves. The more you give, the more you lose. Because what they want is not love. It's containment. And if you stay long enough, you'll start believing that peace means silence, that safety means shrinking, that love means sacrificing your needs to maintain theirs. But that's not love. That's psychic absorption. What makes the unconscious manipulator so dangerous is that they never admit what they're doing, because they don't know they're doing it. They don't need to raise their voice to take control. They just need your kindness, your guilt, your need to fix. And unless you step back, unless you reclaim your emotional boundaries, you'll become a character in a script they've been rehearsing their whole life without ever writing it down. There are people who won't hurt you with insults, or violence, or obvious control. They won't raise their voice. They won't threaten. They won't demand. Instead, they'll sit close. They'll speak softly. And over time, you'll start to notice the fatigue. Not physical, existential. You'll feel it in your chest, in the way you breathe around them, in the way their presence slowly becomes a weight. This is the psychic vampire, the one who doesn't ask for your soul. They just drain it one interaction at a time. They don't need power. They need access to your empathy, and most of all, to your energy. Carl Jung never used the term psychic vampire, but he understood the dynamic. He spoke of pathological bonds, unresolved symbiosis between people, where the self becomes blurred, where autonomy is replaced by emotional dependency. These relationships don't begin with control. They begin with closeness, the illusion of deep connection, the idea that you're the only one who understands them, and maybe at first, that's flattering. It feels good to be needed, to be trusted, to feel important, but over time, you're no longer showing up voluntarily. You're showing up out of guilt, out of obligation, out of fear that if you step away, they'll collapse. And what they take from you isn't just time or attention, it's your emotional clarity, because they operate from a void, a space inside them they've never learned to fill. So they reach out, not to connect, but to extract. They lean on you, then lean harder, then make you responsible for every emotion they refuse to process. If you pull back, they retreat into hurt. If you set boundaries, they interpret them as betrayal. If you try to explain, they twist it into abandonment. You start to lose track of your own needs. You cancel plans. You answer late-night messages. You silence your exhaustion because they just need someone. But what you don't realize is that they've made your energy their oxygen. And no matter how much you give, it's never enough. Because the psychic vampire isn't looking for healing. They're looking for supply. Someone to carry what they won't confront. Someone to reflect back the illusion. That they're okay. That they're whole. That they're not as lost as they feel. And if you're not careful, you begin to shrink. Not all at once, but gradually. Your laughter fades. Your clarity dims. Your identity bends. Until you don't know where they end, and you begin. And when you finally pull away, if you do, you'll feel guilty. Cold, selfish. Because they've taught you that boundaries are cruelty, that rest is betrayal, that your emotional survival is a burden they shouldn't have to carry. But the truth is, you were never their savior. You were their fuel. Jung taught that the self must become whole from within. But the psychic vampire resists that work. They outsource it. They feed off others to avoid facing the emptiness inside. And unless you reclaim your energy, unless you name what's happening, you'll find yourself drained without ever understanding why. This isn't about blame, it's about clarity, because not everyone who cries is honest. Not everyone who needs you should have access to your soul. Some people didn't break you loudly. They drained you quietly, with sighs, with silence, with soft dependency disguised as closeness. This wasn't a war of violence. It was a slow erosion of your identity, and you kept calling it care. But this was never just about them. Jung taught us. What remains unconscious rules us. These patterns live in others, but they've lived in you too. And only those brave enough to look within can ever stop becoming what once hurt them. Now, leave a comment. Which of these types have you met? And which still live inside you? Your words might unlock awareness for someone else, or maybe for you. And don't stop here. The next video takes you deeper, because the more light we shine inward, the less darkness owns us. See you there.